James Lipton's Inside, Chapter 6, page 136. One night I brought Regine a bird in a cage that I'd won on a wheel of fortune in the Place Blanche, and several of the filles wept at the tender gesture. Another night I arrived with a bouquet of yellow roses that evoked cries of distress from the filles in the bar. Yellow flowers, they told me, are a sure sign that a man is deceiving his woman. Given her professional life and our relationship, Regine could hardly be defined as my woman. But that wasn't how the filles saw it, as they ceremoniously dumped the flowers in the trash and forgave my youthful American ignorance. A few days later I was summoned to Greece. I thought the Delphic interlude might put the matter of Rue Pagaille and Regine to rest, but when the movie was canceled and I returned to Paris, I barely took time to dump my luggage at the Hotel du Mani before heading to Pagaille. Everything was as it had been, in every way. Regine and my friends welcomed me back. The artichokes and calvados were on the house that night, and life in the milieu resumed. Of course, Regine and I immediately found ourselves back on the horns of our dilemma. It made for some interesting conversations and occasional tensions. Sometimes Regine thought we should, and sometimes she didn't, because she feared I'd begin to be like any other client rather than forever different. This was certainly different from any relationship I'd ever had, and either in spite of it or because of it, our friendship flourished, and I now became a fully accredited denizen of the station, and unexceptional as every other member of the club. In addition to Regine, there were some remarkable women in that bar. At that time in Paris, still not far removed from the austerity of the war years, unemployment among men was endemic, and in a society like France's, women weren't encouraged to compete with men for the finite number of jobs. The result was that their opportunities were severely circumscribed. One of the few areas open without restriction to women was what was called, discreetly by the French, the middle, the milieu. It wasn't only open without restriction, it was open without censure. Prostitution was legal in France and strictly regulated, with weekly medical examinations. Some of the bordellos in more elegant districts than Pagaille were legendary for their luxury and refinement, and the filles were as pampered and prized as geishas. Educated women, who had elected not to starve to death while waiting for employment in their chosen fields, had simply entered the milieu as a stopgap. Young married women whose husbands were floundering in that difficult time, or whose children were in danger of going hungry, came into the milieu. And when they'd achieved their financial goal, they left and went straight back into polite society, without stigma or a whisper of opprobrium. On the one occasion when I asked Regine the inexcusable question, "Why do you do this?" the businesswoman in her answered patiently and straightforwardly, "I make more money than my banker does." It seems very hard to believe now, in this atrocious age of drugs and disease and enslavement, but for a time in Paris, for a broad stratum of women, many of them utterly indistinguishable from the rest of the city's population, the milieu wasn't just a viable option, it was the only option. One night, I arrived at the bar with a large bouquet of flowers and very bad news. Taking Regine to a corner booth, I told her I would have to return to New York. Sitting back on the banquette as if I'd shoved her, she asked, "Do you want to go?" "No, of course not." "Then why are you going?" I was silent. She rubbed the thumb and forefinger together. "Pas de fric, tout fauché." "No dough, you're broke?" I shrugged. I knew. Regine said, "How?" "The other night when I asked you to buy us some gitans at the tabac, you remember? You made an excuse and we sent a chausseur. I said to myself, he's running out of money." I sat back in the booth, out of arguments and ideas. "I've got my ticket home and enough for this week's rent, that's all." She leaned across the table with a gentle smile and said, I've been thinking about it since then, and the problem is solved." Her smile was radiant. "You'll be my mech." When I recoiled at the idea of delivering clients to her bedside, she laughed and waved the thought away. No, she'd leave that to the chausseurs. I, she said, clearly proud of her ingenuity, would be a specialiste delivering tourists for exhibitions like the one at which we'd met, and receiving the customary commission. She added with the crispness she'd always employed when discussing le business. When I continued to struggle with the idea, she took my hand in both of hers and said, "Jim, don't you see? This way you'll be able to stay in Paris. We'll be together like this for a little longer." She waited, proud of her inspiration and certain of her logic. My mind was racing. Hadn't Stella emphasized that we had to experience life in all its variety? Hadn't Harold and Bobby? Every one of my teachers had argued that, in the end, we had nothing but ourselves to bring to any role, and the richer and broader our life experience, the richer and broader our interpretations would be. And I reasoned, an experience like this would never come again.